Hi, welcome to the Men's Forum. I'm your host, Gary Costanza, and tonight we're going to conclude our coverage of the Legislative Education and Awareness Day up in Albany that the Men's Forum has been covering. We did go up there April 1st, and we have been showing you film clips of some of the legislation that's pending up there, father's rights legislation, family court reform. In previous shows we've brought to you Bob Prentice, his bill that's pending, also David Siddickman's bill. They both gave great speeches, and we brought them to you at home. And what I do want to do is conclude our coverage of that day up in Albany with 4 short clips of some legislators and concerned citizens. So what we're going to do is, as I said, we have 4 clips. The first one's going to be from legislator Jack McEnany, and that's a short clip which I'm going to show you to you right now.
It's always an honor here to follow my friend and colleague, Assemblymember Siddickman. This is an issue, the issue of father's rights, which is really an issue of children's rights, because that's what we're talking about here. Every study that we have shows that a child with a father in his or her life is a better adjusted child, it's a person who has a better attitude on life and a better self-image of themselves. There's a reason why the good Lord gave 2 parents, and to assume that one of them is irrelevant does a great injustice, above all to the child, and secondarily to one, if not 2 of the parents. Presumptive shared custody, mediation, these are all issues of fairness. They don't make a presumption that the father is in some way more qualified than the mother, or vice versa. It simply says that there are 2 citizens that have a responsibility to a child or children, and that unless, as it should be always in a court of law, unless someone can bring some extraordinary reason forward as to why one of those 2 parents is not qualified, that from day one they should be equal citizens with equal rights. This is my 11th year in the legislature, and I can remember when this issue was one that 1 or 2 people would bring to me, would drop into my office once or twice a year, and they would be very lonely people in the marble halls that looked like a vision of being inside a block of blue cheese. They were lonely people because the issue didn't have the public recognition, the public understanding, or what it has today, a great deal of public support. It was an issue that was not just an issue for men who were bitter at how the courts had treated them. It was an issue for people who were their wives, who were trying to get on with their lives, often with second families. It was very much a female issue as well. And at no point was it ever not a children's issue. And every study we see shows what's best for children. And that should be a major, major concern of this legislature. Well, no longer do we have 1 or 2 people wandering through the halls of the LOB hoping to be heard on an obscure issue. We have a real groundswell. We have a groundswell of parents, of grandparents, of many people who, in the interest of justice and in the interest of children, feel that this legislation should be brought forward. Let's hope that this is the year. Otherwise, we're going to have Siddickman around forever. Let's make sure that this is the year that we deliver for our children and all our parents. Thank you.
Welcome back. That was Jack McEnany, legislator, New York State. That was very interesting. We enjoyed that when we saw that. So what we have coming up next is Stephen Walker. He's a men's activist and attorney. He's doing a lot to help fathers and men. I believe he's going to discuss some pending legislation and some lawsuits that he may be bringing. So up next, Stephen Walker.
To announce that this year, 2003, a series of federal actions are going to be filed. The first one to be filed in about 60 days. New York State is going to be brought into federal court on some very narrow issues. The first issue to be addressed is going to be the New York State statutory scheme allowing the courts to award temporary support and spousal maintenance in divorce proceedings. This issue is a blatant violation of the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. This issue has been perfected. It's gone through a 15-year bout in the New York State court systems. This particular brief is not going to be filed pro se. It's going to be filed by competent attorneys. We've had federal individuals already review the brief, and I've had the New York State Attorney General's office on 4 times inform us that they agree with us that the subject statutes cannot be justified and they are unconstitutional. In the process of filing that brief, we're going to be asking for specific declaratory judgments, and we're going to be asking for injunctive relief. In sum and substance, the state be restrained, and the state shall be directed to cease and desist from any enforcement protocol whatsoever on any issue that does not follow the process. Shortly thereafter, and this is very important to David Sinnigman and Owen Johnson, shortly thereafter, I'm not going to make a specific date, but I'm going to say by Labor Day, a federal action will be filed in federal court seeking to declare unconstitutional those aspects of DRL which allow the courts in this state to award sole custody absent a finding of parental unfitness. We currently have a test model for this case taking place in Ohio. We're waiting for a ruling in the particular case. The Ohio statutes are somewhat different from New York's, but nonetheless, the same issue results that absent a finding of parental unfitness, the courts are empowered to award sole custody. It's a flagrant denial of due process, denial of due protection. And we're confident that once we establish the issue in a federal forum, we're going to get federal relief. So I say out loud to the legislators in this building, to the governor across the way, Judith Kay in the Court of Appeals down the block, it's time to bring this insanity to an end.
Yes.
What's going to happen? I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Edward Stephens, director of the On-Step Institute. Ed and I have been partners for some years now. We put on a variety of seminars around the state and conferences. We brought such noted dignitaries as Kyle Pruitt, Warren Farrell to the podium. Some years ago, you may remember that Kyle Pruitt, who was the pediatric chair at Yale, came forward with a public statement that after 12 years of research, they found that you take a naked newborn baby and interface that baby with its dad, the same hormone that's given off when a mom and that baby interchange takes place with the dad, and the dad is as bonded as is the child. So the issue of female superiority from a biological point of view has now been broken by empirical data. Okay, it sets a whole new dimension for the purposes of establishing the well-being of children. And in the same process, one of the things that David has talked about for many, many years, the sole custody awards burden women. They deny women the opportunity to be equally involved in the workforce, equally involved in social issues, equally involved down the line. So enough said on that. Right now I'm going to bring up to the podium Dr. Edward Stephens.
Welcome back. We just listened to Stephen Walker. He was outlining some stuff he's working on and the group that he's with. Well, the next clip we have is by Ed Stephens. He's the president of the Greater New York chapter of the National Coalition of Free Men. He's going to speak for about 7 minutes. This is a very informative and interesting speech. So, Ed Stephens.
Thank you. So glad to be here. I'm a physician, an MD. I'm a psychiatrist. And I'm also what I refer to as a member of the Hole in the Heart Club. In other words, having been through the process, I also lost a child in the process. I have a daughter who hasn't had any contact with me in 10 years. Now, I hear your enthusiasm and your applause, but I'd like to get some audience participation here. And I want you to remember two phrases. The first one is feeding trough. Let me hear it. Feeding trough.
Feeding trough.
Okay, and the second one is think straight. Think straight.
Think straight.
So when I say number one, it's feeding trough. When I say number two, it's think straight. Okay. Now, right now, the way the legislature operates, the way the courts operate, they turn marriages into contracts, and contracts, when a marriage ends, turns to litigation, and that leads to for lawyers. Now, then, when we create the fiction of equitable distribution as opposed to equal distribution, that leads to feeding trough for forensic accountants. And then, I don't want to leave the members of my own profession out of this, so when we turn a divorce into custody litigation, we turn parents into competitors, we create the parental sweepstakes, a winner-takes-all mentality that leads to for psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers. In other words, the mental health profession is bellied up to the feeding trough as well. Now, who's not at the feeding trough? Mothers, fathers, and children. They don't just lose in the divorce process. They lose the resources in money and self-respect that they need to carry on as mothers, fathers, and children after the divorce. Because every mother, every father, and every child going into divorce comes out a mother, a father, and a child. But if they are depleted of their resources and their self-respect, and they are broken by the system, then what happens is what our legislators describe to us as 80% of incarcerated people grew up in fatherless families. They have a much higher incidence of mental illness, alcoholism, and ultimately divorce themselves. So before divorce, we had fathers, mothers, and children. After the divorce, we're still fathers, mothers, and children, but they're broken financially and emotionally. And they're not able then to create effective parenting for the children. Now remember number two. Number two is think straight. What we've heard here this morning is model legislation to help us to think straight and take us away from feeding trough. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by thinking straight. I have a little saying as a psychiatrist. I say, think straight and feel great. And I call that mental hygiene. Now, people don't know what mental hygiene is, so I have to explain it to them. If I talk about dental hygiene, everyone thinks about brushing your teeth. When I talk about mental hygiene, what am I talking about? Thinking straight. Now, what does thinking straight mean in the context that we're in here today? Thinking straight means shared parenting. Thinking straight means retaining parents, parental retention. Because parenting, as far as I can tell, it's a quantity, it's an entity. It's something that if you drop one of the parents out of the equation, you lose a percentage of benefit in the parenting and in the lives of the children. So now, with this legislation, we're actually promoting mental hygiene. And And that means we are thinking straight. And moving away from the feeding trough. So I applaud our legislators. I applaud you. And as a mental health professional, I see what we're doing here as the wave of the future for you as fathers, as mothers, for our children, and for our society. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce Miss Lorraine Simmons, who's a psychotherapist and a social worker. Through my personal conversation with her before coming to the podium, I found to be deeply insightful in regard to matters that go to the heart of what's at stake here. As a social worker, she's not coming to the trough. She's not coming to the feeding trough. She's trying to come to the aid of all of us. And so I'd like to introduce Lorraine Simmons.
Welcome back. That was Ed Stephens, President, Greater New York Chapter of the National Coalition of Free Men. And he spoke at length about fathers' rights and the importance of fathers and the damage that's done to children when removed from their father's influence. For our final clip, we have Lorraine Simmons. She's an activist and fathers' rights advocate, and I think you'll find this last clip very interesting. So here's Lorraine Simmons.
Hi. I started getting involved in this movement because I started dating someone who was, I thought, at the end of a horrific divorce. And it was at the end. It doesn't seem like there's ever an end. His divorce took 4 years. He has 3 children he hasn't seen in 3 years. And when I started dating him, I thought, this is a great guy. And I really liked him, and there was chemistry, and it was great. And as a therapist, I thought I have a pretty good idea of my sense of people and who people are. And I started to hear the stories of his divorce and what was going on with his children, that he wasn't able to see them, and what he was being accused of. And I thought, the first thing I thought to myself is, he had to have done something. People just don't lose contact with their children. People just don't, the courts just don't take that away from people. He had to have done something. And I started questioning him, as if my assumption was that he was guilty of something, and I was going to find out what it was, because I didn't want to be involved with somebody who was a horrible human being. But in the back of my head, it just didn't feel right. You know, I work with people all the time. I worked in child protective services where I did evaluations. Something didn't feel right. So he gave me court transcripts. He said, read them. And he said, in fact, why don't you come with me to court? And I said, all right, I'm going to do that, mostly because of my ego, because I thought I can't do that wrong. So I went, and I couldn't believe what was going on. I couldn't believe it. There was no finding of any abuse. There was no finding of anything wrong on his part. And the judge actually said, I don't know what's going on here, and I'm not going to rule in favor of either one of you, so I believe that you should go to supervised visitation because they're going to sort it out. And as a good social worker, I thought, that's good. There's going to be a social worker there, and she's going to evaluate it, and she's going to see what the problem is. And you know what happened? You got to change of judge. And the next judge said, well, you had supervised visitation. You must have done something wrong. And you know, the social worker in the supervised visitation never submitted anything. They didn't submit anything. It was just down that it was done. It didn't say that she didn't bring them. It didn't say that the children came and there was good visitation, they got good feedback, and then the third time they were crying and screaming and said they were afraid of him, even though he hadn't had contact with them in a year. None of that was ever filed, and yet he was ruled against. And I thought, oh my God, what's going on here? And I kept showing up to court, and I kept finding that because there was no finding for him, the findings were then against him. Now it's gone on, he's gotten divorced, and in the divorce, his lawyer at the time said, look, it'll straighten out. Just get divorced, and she'll calm down, and then she'll cooperate. And he was exhausted, he was in bankruptcy, he was just depressed, and he finally said, okay, uncle, I'll do what they're telling me to do. And the judge even said to him, just let it calm down. So he got divorced. And now he doesn't see them. And the next judge, because there was another change of judge, the next judge said, well, you didn't get custody and you didn't get visitation. There must be something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong. What's wrong is nobody ever makes a decision, nobody ever takes responsibility, and there's an assumption that if you're accused of something, that you're guilty. Where else do we have that happen in this country? That you're a criminal. You're not divorcing your children, you're divorcing the spouse. And what right does she have to use these children as hostages to get more money? Money because he wanted to see his children. She has the money, he's in bankruptcy, and of course she fought that too.
And he still doesn't see his kids.
And he still doesn't see his children. And he got a forensics exam. And the forensics exam said that there is absolute parental alienation here, that is clear, it happened, it was demonstrated, that she is unstable, that he clearly had a close relationship with his children, that no longer exists. There was no finding, and the conclusion is, keep things the same. He should have visitations. And you go back to the judge, and the judge says, yes, you should have visitation, but we will not enforce it. What did you just give him? You gave him nothing. So, we find that everything you say is true, and you know what? You're still out of luck. Please pay her more money. And by the way, here's your bill report. This is ridiculous. It has to stop. Yep. 2 out of 3 of his children have been diagnosed now with oppositional defiant disorder. They're on medication. This is disgusting. Yeah. These children are being destroyed. Yep. They're starting to get in trouble in school. For what? For what? For money. That's what it is. It's about money. The custodial parent gets paid. That's it. That's the only advantage. It's not a women's issue. It's not a women's issue. What do women get from this? Overworked? That's it. You need 2 people to raise children. You need 2 people. And it seems to me that the way that we go about it, the way we go about divorce in this country, the fact that it's said custody. Who do you get custody of? You get custody of criminals, not children. Children don't need custody, they need parents. Custodial rights, what is that? Parental rights, children's rights. The minute you go in to see a lawyer, what they're going to tell you is what they're going to do for you. What about this family? This family exists after these divorce papers go through. And in mediation, at least you're going to negotiate and you're going to say, okay, so what are the two going to look like later? What is in the best interest of the children? And you can call these 2 people and you can say, you know, we know why you're getting divorced. That's really clear. And the 2 of you, okay, and the 2 of you need to agree how to go forward. And we have to support this legislation. And we have to get out there. And all of you need to sign this petition that Mr. Elder has over here. And to get this legislation done. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back. That was Lorraine Simmons. Our final clip of our coverage of Legislative Education and Awareness Day up in Albany, something that the Men's Forum covered April 1st. I hope you found it very interesting. I'd like to remind all of our viewers to get out there and vote. Vote for your legislators that are going to help men and fathers. And ultimately all of our children. So, without further ado, I'll say goodnight and keep tuned to the Men's Forum.